Every day before I go to sleep I look at a wooden box that I keep in the back of my closet. Inside it there is a piece of the past that I have never been able to leave behind, a white veil yellowed by time and a letter that was never read by those who should. This is the story of the day my life ended before it even began. My name is Mrs. Val Dyrene. I am 79 years old and I carry inside my chest a pain that even with the passing of the decades has never disappeared. They say that time heals everything. But I disagree. Time only teaches us to live with certain wounds, but there are pains that become part of who we are. I was once a young woman full of dreams, ready to live the happiest day of my life, but in a fraction of a second fate took away from me what I loved most and turned my wedding into a funeral. Before continuing, I would like to know where you are watching this story of my life. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel and like the video, it helps us a lot. I was born in 1945 in a quiet little town in the interior of Rio Grande do Sul called Chinambu. At that time life in the countryside was simple and difficult at the same time. I grew up watching my mother washing clothes in Rio to earn a few bucks and my father working in the fields weeding under the scorching sun. We didn't have luxuries, but we didn't go hungry either. The house where we lived was small, with mud walls and a thatched roof. During the winter, the cold wind would come in through the cracks in the window. I huddled next to my brothers to sleep. Life for women at that time was predictable. Since I was little, my mother taught me that I should learn to cook, sew, and take care of a house because one day I would have a husband to serve. But I didn't care because my dream was simple. To find a good man, to get married, to build a family and be happy. I didn't ask for much. I just wanted a peaceful life away from the suffering that I saw my mother go through that morning of June 12, 1960. I woke up with my heart overflowing with joy. My wedding would be in a few hours. I felt like my life was really beginning that day. My mother and my sisters ran around the house adjusting the last details while I tried to control my anxiety. My skin was hot, my stomach was hot. Wrapped up, and even though I knew it was a happy day I felt butterflies in my stomach that seemed different from any other I've ever had. Wake up Val Dyrene, today is the big day, shouted my younger sister Zelia with a big smile. She was 14 years old. She was full of energy and always said she wanted to have a wedding like mine. One day I smiled back, trying to hide my emotion. Outside my father took a knife to the stone, getting ready to cut the bread and cold cuts that would be served for breakfast to the guests. My mother, with an apron tied around her waist, stirred a pot of milk on the wood stove. The smell of fresh coffee took over the house, mixed with the perfume of the flowers that my older sister Jandira picked from the backyard to decorate the table. I sat on the wooden chair near the window watching the golden sun invade the kitchen. Everything was so perfect. It was at that moment that I heard a who coming from the gate. My heart raced before I even looked. It was Antonio. He shouldn't be there. It was customary for the groom not to see the bride before the wedding, but Antonio was never a man who followed these superstitions. He was in a hurry in living. What a lack of patience, man, my mother scolded, drying her hands on her apron. It's just a minute, Mrs. Marina, I swear, she grumbled, but opened the door for him to come in. When he crossed the threshold I felt a shiver. Antonio was wearing a starched white long-sleeved shirt and black pants. His hair was wet as if he had just gotten out of the shower, and the smell, oh how I remember that smell. He used a cheap shaving lotion, but for me it was the best perfume in the world. He smiled and I smiled back. What was your rush? I joked, crossing my arms. Antonio looked at me with a different sparkle in his eyes. He always looked at me with love, but that day there was something more. It was as if he wanted to keep that moment forever. I just wanted to see you before the altar. They say it brings bad luck. The worst bad luck would be not seeing you today. He held my hand. His fingers were warm, firm. It was a strong grip, as if he wanted to convey to me a message that I still couldn't understand. I'm going to go get an important detail for the wedding, a surprise for you. What do you say? He laughed and shook his head. If I tell it loses its charm, but I promise I'll be back before mass. My eyes shone. Antonio always thought about details. He didn't have money for big gifts, but he always found a way to surprise me. I already love you. You don't need anything else, I know, but let me do this for us. It was then that he did something he had never done before. He held me by the face and gave me a long kiss on the forehead. There was my last look, my last touch, my last memory of him in life. He walked out the door, turned around one last time and gave me a smile, and then he left. I still remember the way the sun shone on his back as he walked to the dirt road, the way his shadow was projected on the ground, the dust rising with his hurried steps. That was the last time I saw Antonio. Time passed slowly. After he left I went back inside DEA with a silly smile on my face, imagining what could be such a surprise. A flower, a bow, a gift. I had no way of knowing that destiny had in store a completely different surprise. My mother called me for coffee, but I could barely eat. I was so nervous, so anxious that the food seemed not to go down. The women of the city started coming to help me get dressed. Donna Anisha, a neighbor of many years, helped me pin up my veil with hairpins. My sisters fixed the lace on my dress, and time passed. 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours, noon, and Antonio didn't come back. At first I thought he had just taken a while. Maybe he was caught up in a conversation with a friend at the fair, maybe he had met someone on the road, but as the minutes turned into hours I began to feel a tightness in my chest. Something was wrong. The sickos began. The women looked at each other worried. My father left the house and went to the square, to Antonio's family's house. Nothing. Then a man came running into the church. He was pale, sweaty, and out of breath. The scene seemed to happen in slow motion. There was an accident on the road. A car overturned. It was Antonio. The world around me went dark. The ground disappeared. My mother screamed. The women began to cry. My sisters tried to hold me, but my legs wouldn't obey me. No, no, no. I tried to run, but I was held back. I wanted to see him. I needed to see him, but Antonio wouldn't be coming back that day. My wedding turned into a wake, my life changed forever, and it was then that I met Antonio, the great love of my life. I was 17 years old when I saw him for the first time at the city fair. He sold cheese and sweets while I accompanied my mother to buy groceries. Antonio was a year older than me. He had an easy smile and a look so deep that it seemed to see my soul. The moment our eyes met, I felt something inside me that I had never felt before. My heart beat faster, my hands sweated, and at that moment I knew that he would be the man I would marry. In the following days, I began to see him more often. He always found a way to pass by my house, pretending he was just passing through. Until one day he plucked up the courage and asked my father's permission to visit me. At that time, dating was a serious thing. There was no such freedom as today, where young people meet alone. Visits were made in the living room. I felt the watchful eye of my parents, but none of that mattered because with each meeting I fell more in love with him. Antonio was a hard-working and honest boy. He helped others from an early age. My father worked in the countryside and sold the family's produce at the fair to help out at home. He had no money or possessions, but he had something much more valuable, a good heart and the promise of a worthy future by my side. After years of dating, we finally got engaged. Antonio asked for my hand in marriage at a simple dinner surrounded by our families. I remember as if it were today the joy I felt at that moment. It was a mix of anxiety, happiness, and gratitude. The wedding was scheduled for June 12, 1965. A day I had dreamed of so many times that it seemed like a fairy tale about to come true. The preparations were made with the little we had. My mother sewed my wedding dress by hand, reusing fabrics she found at the church. It was a simple dress, but for me it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The delicate, embroidered veil was lent to me by a neighbor who had gotten married the year before. And, in turn, managed to buy a used suit from a gentleman in the city. He told me with shining eyes that he had never worn anything so beautiful. The night before the wedding, I could barely sleep a wink. My head was full of dreams, imagining what my new bride would be like. Life with the man I loved. I could already see myself waking up early to make coffee for Antonio, taking care of our house, raising our future children. I was about to fulfill my greatest wish. On the morning of June 12th I woke up before sunrise. The house was in a party, my mother preparing the last details, my sisters fixing my hair. The church was already decorated with flowers picked from the backyard. Everything was perfect, but I didn't know that that would be the most painful day of my life. Around 9 in the morning he quickly came by my house to say he was going to pick up a last-minute detail for the wedding. He wanted to buy a special flower to put on his jacket. He kissed me on the forehead and said, "I'll see you at the altar in a little while." Those were the last words I heard from him. An hour passed, then 2 the clock struck noon and Antonio still hadn't arrived. The priest was starting to get impatient. The guests were whispering. A tightness in my chest started to overwhelm me. Something was wrong. It was then that a man ran into the church out of breath and with a pale face. I'll never forget those words. There had been an accident on the road, a car, it capsized. It was Antonio. At that moment the world spun around me, people's voices became distant, my body became weak, my legs gave out and I fell to the ground. Antonio never made it to the altar. Instead of a wedding, there was a wake. The white dress that my mother sewed with so much love became the symbol of my mourning. The day that should have been the happiest of my life turned into the cruelest of all. I spent years unable to look at that dress. For a long time I hated life for having taken away what I loved most. I locked myself in my world, without hope. Without the will to move forward. I thought I would never be happy again, but this story is not over yet. Life in mysterious ways teaches us that even in the worst moments there is still hope. I could never have imagined that decades later something would happen to change the course of my story, but I'll tell you about that later. The world around me seemed like a blur. I remember seeing distressed faces, hands on my face, murmurs and sobs, but what really echoed in my mind was the last sentence I heard. There was an accident. It was Antonio. I felt my legs give out. It was as if my body couldn't move. The wedding dress that my mother sewed with so much love was covered in dust when I fell to the floor of the church. I heard voices around me, but none of them made sense. Time seemed to have stopped. No, no, no. I whispered, grabbing my father's arm, who was trying to hold me. He looked at me with eyes full of pain, not knowing what to say. My mother cried desperately, holding her head in her hands. The women of the city began to pray. Some went to hide in the corner of the church. Others just lowered their eyes, not daring to look at me. Until someone said the words that broke my heart for good. Valdirene. He couldn't resist. The sound around me disappeared. I wanted to run. I wanted to run to where he was. I wanted to see with my own eyes that it was all a lie, but I couldn't move a single muscle. That's when I felt arms holding me, lifting me up. My father, one of Antonio's brothers, supported me, trying to keep me standing. My hands were shaking. My body was weak, my heart was racing, but somehow I managed to ask, with a voice almost silent. Where is he? Antonio's brother looked down. They brought him to his mother's house. It was enough. I ran out. I ran without thinking. I ran breathless. I ran as if arriving there could change reality. I remember that the streets of Shinambu were strangely silent. The neighbors watched everything from afar, hidden behind the windows. Some women put their hands on their chests when they saw me pass. I felt the weight of the stairs on me, but nothing mattered. When I arrived at Antonio's house, I saw his mother sitting on the porch, destroyed by pain, holding a rosary between her fingers. When she saw me, she collapsed on the floor crying loudly, and it was only when I entered the house that the truth hit me like a punch in the chest. Antonio was lying there on the living room table, covered by a white sheet. My Antonio, my fiancé, but now he was just a body. No, no, my voice echoed through the house. I ran to him. I grabbed his hands. They were cold. Antonio, wake up. You promised me. You promised me. His mother was crying beside me. His father, a strong man, was kneeling beside the table without the strength to say a single word. My fingers trembled when touching his face. It couldn't be real, but it was, and it was there, seeing my love lying lifeless, that I finally understood my marriage had it became awake that same afternoon. Instead of getting dressed for the altar, I got dressed for a funeral. The wedding dress remained on the chair in the room intact as a cruel reminder of what could have been. My mother, without strength, handed me an old black dress that one of my aunts had brought. I don't even remember putting on the dress. I only remember the butterflies in my stomach, the nausea of the emptiness inside my chest. The whole city gathered at the cemetery. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I should have been in the church surrounded by white flowers listening to the priest bless our union, but instead I was in front of a coffin listening to the earth being thrown over the man I loved. The priest said a few words I didn't hear. Some people sang a hymn I didn't hear. I could only look at that coffin. I could only hear Antonio's last words echoing in my mind. If I tell you, it loses its charm, but I promise I'll be back before Mass. But he didn't come back, and I never found out what surprise he wanted to give me. The following days were a blur. My mother forced me to eat, but everything tasted like nothing. My brothers tried to distract me, but nothing made sense. The wedding dress remained hanging in the room until one day my mother decided to fold it and put it away in the back of the closet. The days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months, and I stopped living. You need to move on, my daughter. I heard that phrase so many times that I lost count. Everyone expected that with time I would accept it. That one day I would smile again, be interested in another man, and build a new family. But what no one understood was that I had already made my plans, and they all included Antonio. Without him, the world lost its color, and I began to believe that I would never be happy again. But life, in a cruel and unpredictable way, had other plans for me. And even though I thought my love story was over, something would still happen that would change everything. But I'll tell you about that later. The first few days after Antonio's burial were a blur. I felt like a dry leaf carried by the wind with no reason to go. The chair that was once full of life is now suffocating. The eyes carry a weight that crushes me a little more. When I pass by, others are just so young, so good, and I lived without ever having. I didn't leave the house. I spent weeks locked in my room, lying in bed staring at the ceiling. My mother tried to call me to eat, but I barely felt hungry. My brothers tried to cheer me up, but I couldn't answer. Time became an unbearable weight. The wedding dress, the one I had spent months dreaming of wearing, was now folded in the back of the closet. My mother tried to hide it, but I knew it was there. I knew that even if I tried to move on, that memory would never go away. Living in Shinambu became torture. I couldn't take a step without someone looking at me with pity or curiosity. Some people came to me with words of comfort, but deep down I knew that time would move on for them, for me not. At the fair, the vendors looked at me with an uncomfortable silence. The neighbors who before talked about dresses and weddings now talked about how I needed to recover. But how do you recover from something like that on Sundays? I avoided going near the church. The bell that rang for the masses was the same one that should have rang at my wedding, but instead of the bells of the celebration, what did I do? All I heard that day was the muffled sound of sobbing in the cemetery, and every time someone said time heals, I wanted to scream, because time doesn't heal anything. Time just showed me day after day that I was alone. The months turned into years, and I remained trapped in the past. I was never the same again. After Antonio's death, I became a shadow of who I once was. Girls my age were getting married, forming families. We were in that house, in that morning, trapped in that love that they never allowed me to live. I saw other women my age getting married, having children, starting their lives. My life had stopped the day Antonio was buried. A few days later, I closed myself off even more. I didn't leave the house. I didn't talk to anyone. My mother said I needed to go back to living, but as if life no longer made sense, they offered me a job as a seamstress, helping the women of the city make dresses for parties and weddings. I refused. I never wanted to touch a wedding dress again. I tried to help my mother around the house, but every dish washed, every piece of laundry hung out, every piece of bread kneaded brought back a memory of Antonio. Everything reminded me of him. Everything at night was the worst moment. It was when the house was silent, when everyone was asleep and I was alone with my thoughts. Many times at dawn I would sit on the porch and look at the road where I saw Antonio for the last time. I expected to see him coming back. I hoped it had all been a mistake, but he never came back. As the years went by, the city began to put pressure on my family. I was already approaching 26 years old, and by the standards of the time a single woman at that age was already considered a spinster. My mother began to insist that I meet other men. Some neighbors tried to introduce me to boys from the city. They said I was still young and deserved to try again, but as if I could never let Antonio go. Every time someone suggested I meet a suitor, my stomach would turn. I didn't want another love. I couldn't. Antonio's place was still occupied inside me. It was almost 10 years living like this, trapped alone, but life has mysterious ways of acting. When I had already accepted that my story was over, I wrote in sadness. When I no longer expected anything new, something happened that made me question everything I believed about love and destiny. Something I could never imagine. The years passed. The pain didn't go away but settled inside me like a weight that I carried every day. I got used to the loneliness, with the silence of the house, with the sleepless nights looking at the ceiling and wondering what my life would have been like if Antonio had come to church that day. My routine was always the same. I helped my mother at home. I went to the store to get groceries. I came back and spent the rest of the day locked in the room. The days were gray, monotonous, always the same, until in 1974 something happened. It was a morning like any other. My mother had asked me to go to the market to get some things. As I avoided leaving the house, it had been months since I had been in the city center, but that day she insisted, "Valdirene needs to go out for a bit. Go get me some flour and coffee, please." I wanted to refuse, but I didn't want to disappoint her. I put on a simple dress, tied my hair up, and went walking through the streets. Shinambu, after so long, was strange. I felt people's eyes on me. Some whispered. Others just looked away. It was as if I still carried a mark. As if everyone still saw me as the bride who never got married. But it was at the fair that my life changed. While I was choosing some bread to take home, I heard a firm, polite voice behind me. I turned around and saw a tall man with a calm look and a discreet smile. He was wearing a simple dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves and was holding a shopping bag. "Good morning," I replied without paying much attention. He continued to observe me for a few seconds before saying, "Sorry to ask, but aren't you Dona Marina's daughter?" I felt surprised. "Yes, I am." He smiled. "My name is Renato. I just moved here. My mother talks a lot about your family." Renato. The name didn't mean anything to me, but there was something about him that intrigued me. Maybe it was the respectful way he spoke. Maybe it was the calm look that reminded me a little of Antonio. We talked for a few minutes. I discovered that he had recently moved to the city after years of living in Cachoeira do Sul, where I worked as an accountant. Now he was helping an uncle who had opened a fabric store in the city. He was different. He didn't talk much, but he listened attentively. He didn't try to force a conversation, but he also didn't make the silence uncomfortable. And for the first time in many years I felt something different inside me, a light sensation, as if for an instant my tired heart had been awakened. After that day I started seeing Renato frequently. He always passed by my house, and sometimes he talked to my father about business. My mother soon noticed and started to encourage me. "He is a good man, Valdirene. Maybe it is a sign from God," but I didn't want to believe it. The fear consumed me, and if I allowed myself to feel it again and life brought it to me again, I couldn't go through the same pain again. So I walked away. I stopped going to the fair. I stopped leaving the house. I avoided any place where he could be, but Renato didn't give up so easily. One afternoon he appeared at my door. My mother welcomed him and called me when I arrived. He smiled, holding a book in his hands. "Oh, I don't want to bother you, but I know you like to read. I thought maybe you would like this." It was a book of simple but beautiful poems. I hesitated. I didn't want to accept, but when I looked in his eyes I could tell he wasn't trying to win me over. He wasn't trying to force anything. He just wanted me to smile again, and for the first time in almost 10 years I felt something like a smile forming on my lips. After that day Renato started to show up more often. He didn't pressure me. He didn't talk about the past. He just treated me with respect and patience. We started talking more about life, about simple things, about books, about the dreams I'd had and that I thought I could never have again, and little by little something started to change inside me. The morning was still there, the longing still haunted me. Angry, but for the first time I felt that maybe I didn't need to live the rest of my life stuck to what I lost. Maybe there was more for me, maybe there was still something beautiful waiting for me, and it was then that I realized I had a choice to make. I would continue living in the past, stuck to a pain that would never let me move forward, or I would allow myself to live again. And for the first time in almost a decade I considered the possibility of opening my heart again, but would I be able to? Was I ready for this? I didn't know, but life was about to show me the answer. The days passed and Renato, he stayed there. He never forced anything, he never pressured me, he just waited. He waited for me to be ready to let the past rest, but the past is not easily erased, and even though a part of me began to wish for a new life, another part screamed that I had no right, that accepting the love of another man would be a betrayal of Antonio's memory, and it was this conflict that consumed me for months. The whole city was already talking about it. The neighbors were whispering at the fairs. The men talked about it at the barber shop. Will Valdirene finally move on? I pretended not to hear, I pretended not to care, but the truth was that other people's opinions were the least of my problems. What haunted me was guilt, because deep down a part of me wanted to know Renato better. I wanted to know what it was like to smile without feeling a weight on my chest. I wanted to know if it was possible to love again without erasing what was left behind. But what if fate took that away from me again? What if I allowed myself to love only to have my heart crushed again? What if I wasn't ready? I spent months living this dilemma until something happened. Something that made me realize that I couldn't stay stuck in what was already, and that maybe life was giving me a chance to be happy again. It was an afternoon in October when my mother called me in the backyard. Valdirene, I found something you need to see. I thought it was strange. My mother wasn't one for mysteries. She was holding a wooden box, the one that was forgotten at the back of the closet. My heart sank. I knew what was inside it. My wedding veil and something else. My mother opened the lid and took out an envelope, yellowed with time. It was inside your wedding dress. We found it the day we put it away. But you were so sick that we never had the courage to show it. My hands were shaking. When I picked up the envelope, the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Antonio. My chest tightened. I sat on the floor, afraid to open it. But I knew I needed to read it. With trembling fingers, I tore the edge and took out the folded sheet of paper from inside. The first line hit me like a punch. My beloved Valdirene. The tears came before I could even continue, but I continued. If you're reading this letter, it's because I'm no longer by your side. Maybe it was a mistake. I waited so long to give you this, but I wanted you to know how much you changed my life. My heart raced since the day I saw you for the first time. I knew that you would be the great love of my life, and I never doubted it, but I also knew that life is unpredictable, so if one day destiny were to separate us, I want you to promise me one thing: keep moving forward. Don't let sadness steal the years that you still have ahead of you. The love we had, it was beautiful, but it can't be your prison. You deserve to smile, you deserve to be happy, you deserve to love again. The letter fell into my lap. I cried like I hadn't cried in years, because for the first time I realized that maybe I was allowed to move on. Maybe loving again wasn't a betrayal. Maybe it was what Antonio wanted for me. That night I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The whole time I had been waiting for a sign to move on, and it came in the most unexpected way. I needed to make a decision, and there were only two options: stay stuck in the past, living a life of eternal mourning, give myself a chance and discover what else life had to offer me. And then for the first time in years I made courage. The next day I put on a simple light blue dress and went to the fabric store where Renato worked. When I entered, he looked at me surprised. I had never gone to him. He dried his hands on his apron and came to me. Valdirene, is everything okay? I took a deep breath. I wanted to know if you would agree to accompany me to the square this afternoon. He blinked as if trying to understand. Do you want me to go with you? Yes. He didn't ask anything else. He just smiled and nodded. I'll go get the three of them. And at that moment something inside me changed. For the first time in almost 10 years I was allowing someone to truly accompany me. It wasn't love yet, but it was a step in the right direction, and maybe it was the beginning of something beautiful. In that afternoon in October 1974, when I left home to meet Renato, I felt my heart beating hard in my chest. I didn't know what to expect. The wind blew lightly, shaking the dry leaves on the sidewalks. The sky was clear blue like I hadn't noticed in a long time. I walked to the central square of Shinambu where we agreed to meet. I sat on the wooden bench near the church, that same place where years before I had dreamed with the future that never happened. And then he arrived. Renato was wearing a light shirt and linen pants. It seemed like he was also nervous when he saw me. He smiled, a shy Smile almost awkwardly. I was happy with his invitation. I nodded without knowing what to say. I was still learning to speak again, learning to feel without fear. He sat next to me and for a few moments we just watched the movement in the square, the noise of the children playing, the gentlemen talking on the sidewalk, the women with bags returning from the market. After a few minutes he broke the silence. You know I never wanted to rush you. You don't know. I nodded. I know. He took a deep breath and continued. I never wanted to replace anything in your life, Val Direne. I just wanted you to know that there are still good things to live in. If one day you felt like you could, I would like to be here. I closed my eyes for a second. My heart weighed less now. I took a deep breath before answering. I think I'm ready to find out. He didn't say anything. He just held my hand gently as if he understood that simple gesture was already too much for me, and it was at that moment I realized that for the first time in almost 10 years I didn't feel guilty. I felt lightness, and that was enough to take the first step. After that day in the square, Renato and I started to see each other more often. Nothing was rushed. There was no pressure, just conversations, discreet laughter, short walks through the city streets, and little by little my heart started to open again. Little by little I started to realize that it wasn't a betrayal to move on, because moving on didn't mean forgetting Antonio. Moving on meant honoring the life he wanted me to live, and somehow I knew he would be happy. But time passed, and in 1976 Renato asked me to marry him. When he said those words my heart stopped for a moment. Val Direne, I love you and I want to build a life with you. I know that your heart will always have a space that belongs to the past, and I respect that, but I want you to let me be part of your future. Will you marry me? Was the question I was always afraid to hear, because for many years I thought I would never be able to say yes again. But looking into Renato's eyes I knew I was ready, and for the first time since 1965 I said yes on June 12, 1976, exactly 11 years after that day when my life fell apart. I finally got married, but there was no decorated church or white dress or grand party. This time I wanted something different. We got married at the registry office with a simple ceremony, surrounded only by our families and closest friends. My dress was light blue, no lace, no veil, no memories of the past, and when I looked at Renato by my side I knew I was in the right place. Maybe it wasn't the story I dreamed of when I was young, but it was a beautiful story. It was my second chance, and I accepted it with an open heart. The years went by. Renato and I built a life together, a modest house, a home full of peace. We had 2 children who brought joy to the days that were once so dark, but I never forgot Antonio at any time. He always lived inside me in every memory and every thought, but now he was no longer a pain. He was a beautiful part of my story, a part that taught me to love, and in the end it wasn't a goodbye but a new beginning. Today at 79 years old I still keep that wooden box in the back of my closet. The veil from my first wedding is still there, Antonio's letter too, and when I close my eyes and I remember everything I lived through, I realize that my heart had room for 2 great loves. And even though the pain was great, life was also generous with me, because in the end I had the ending I never imagined, but it was the right ending for me. If you liked my life story, subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps a lot. See you later, my dears.